Have you ever noticed the same small signal showing up again and again, almost like a quiet echo in your life? Why is it that the biggest changes often begin with something that feels too small to matter? And how do you know when a coincidence is not random, but a threshold asking you to step across? Today, we'll explore how these subtle clues can become turning points. Not through fate or prophecy, but through patterns, choices, and the way small moves reshape the map we live by. If you've ever felt that your story is circling back to the same signs, this is where you'll see why. The truth is that thresholds appear when signals repeat. The meaning is that every overlooked clue is a chance to redraw the map. He was known as the cartographer, a man who trusted maps more than memory. Every street was drawn, every alley measured, every bridge carefully marked. Yet one evening, in the district he knew best, he became lost. The roads twisted in ways his parchment did not show. He followed familiar routes, but they bent into confusion. At the corner of an old stone wall, he noticed a scratch, a faint mark, meaningless at first glance. The next day, he saw the same mark again, in another street. Then again, carved on the doorframe of a closed shop. Could these small signs be pointing towards something unseen? The cartographer realized that even the most perfect map could miss the truth of the terrain. The city was alive, changing, speaking in quiet echoes he had ignored. The lesson was clear. A map can guide, but it cannot replace attention. Truth often hides in the overlooked details. And so the question arose. If the signals repeat, should he trust the map or follow the clues? Layer 1, the psychological threshold. The cartographer stood at the familiar crossroad. His map insisted on the main avenue, the path he had walked 100 times. But the faint scratch on the wall called him toward a narrow side street. He hesitated. The main road promised certainty. The alley offered only risk. Why do our minds cling to the familiar, even when it no longer serves us? At last, he folded the map and stepped into the small street. The air felt different, heavier yet clearer. Every sound seemed sharper, every stone more defined. This first act of turning away from the obvious was not about bravery. It was about recognizing that doubt itself can be a compass. The cartographer had crossed a psychological threshold. He was no longer only a keeper of lines on paper. He had become a witness to the hidden language of the city. The meaning was simple. A threshold begins the moment one dares to question the old path. Layer 2, the behavioral threshold. 3 days passed. The cartographer walked the same streets, not with the map in hand, but with a notebook in his pocket. Every time a signal appeared, a mark, a lantern, a repeated sound, he made a note at the edge of his chart. He called this his 3-day trial line. Not a grand discovery, only a test. One friction removed, one reminder added, one review each night. Why is it that the smallest recorded actions feel more real than the grandest intentions? At the end of 3 days, he saw the pattern forming. The marks were not random. They traced a hidden route, parallel to the one his map insisted upon. This practice did not require faith. It required observation, patience, and a willingness to record. The cartographer learned that behavior is the ink of transformation. Without notes, even the clearest signs dissolve into forgetfulness. The truth is that reality responds to what we track. The meaning is that small actions, repeated and reviewed, redraw the map more than any theory. So he set aside the old parchment. In its place, a living map began to grow, made not of streets alone, but of signals, choices, and quiet confirmations. Layer 3, the system threshold. The cartographer's notebook began to fill with marks, arrows, and quiet annotations. He noticed that his steps no longer belonged to him alone. Others followed, curious about the strange routes he now traced. At first, he hesitated to share. His notes were messy, unpolished, uncertain. But he placed them on a wooden table in the square, titled simply, Companion Notes. Soon, travelers began to copy his markings. A lantern scratched on the wall here, a symbol carved there. What was once a private trial became a shared guide. Why does the act of sharing transform a personal map into a collective compass? In this moment, the cartographer crossed the system threshold. He was no longer a solitary observer. He had become a guide, not by authority, but by transparency. The lesson was plain. One person's notes can shift the path of many. The truth is that networks form when one voice dares to be visible. The meaning is that even uncertain sketches can lead others when left open to the world. Still, questions rose like smoke in the minds of the travelers. What if the signals were only coincidence? What if the scratches and lanterns were nothing more than accidents? The cartographer did not dismiss the doubt. Instead, he offered a method. "Let us test," he said. "If 3 signs appear with no pattern, then we redraw. If they align, we continue. Coincidence may be random once, but repetition is evidence." Could clarity exist without the chance to be wrong? The value was not in certainty, but in verification. Every threshold must be tested, or else it dissolves into fantasy. The truth is that evidence grows through repetition. The meaning is that self-honesty is the compass against illusion. And so the promise was renewed. The journey ahead would not be built on blind faith, but on experiments that anyone could attempt. The cartographer soon faced deeper challenges. The signals grew more complex, pulling him into places his map never named. Here, 3 great fault lines awaited, each one a test of endurance. First came the familiar blind spot. He walked streets he thought he knew, only to discover hidden turns he had ignored for years. The map was accurate, but his attention had been narrow. He saw now that blindness is often not the absence of data, but the refusal to question the obvious. Isn't it true that we stumble most often where we believe we are safest? By stepping into the blind spot, the cartographer learned that familiarity can be a trap. The threshold demanded humility. The truth is that the ordinary hides more thresholds than the unknown. The meaning is that what we overlook daily may hold the keys to change. The second fault line was the broken bridge. A structure he had trusted for years now sagged with cracks. Others insisted it was still safe, but he knew otherwise. Crossing it would mean collapse. Why do we cling to old methods, even when they no longer hold our weight? He turned back, refusing the bridge. Instead, he searched for stones, shallow crossings, small ways forward. The choice was slower but real. The broken bridge revealed that progress requires abandoning what once worked. To survive, he had to let go of the tools that had carried him before. The truth is that strength lies not in holding on, but in knowing when to release. The meaning is that every system eventually demands reinvention. The third fault line was the torn page. In a sudden storm, a section of his notebook ripped away, soaked and unreadable. The signals he had tracked for weeks were gone. He felt powerless, as if his progress had been erased. What happens when the evidence we rely on disappears? He sat in the quiet, staring at the ruined page. Then he realized the notes were never the map itself. The true record was in his memory, in his changed eyes, in the way he now walked. The torn page forced him to accept that proof can be lost, but transformation cannot. Once crossed, a threshold remains within. The truth is that identity outlasts evidence. The meaning is that the path becomes internal the moment it changes who we are. Through the 3 fault lines, blind spot, broken bridge, torn page, the cartographer's journey deepened. He was not simply charting streets. He was redrawing himself. The long spine of the story revealed that thresholds are not single moments. They are layers, each demanding a new kind of seeing, acting, and remembering. And each fault line, though painful, confirmed the same argument. Signals are not accidents. They are invitations to evolve. The cartographer stood at the edge of his new map. It was no longer a parchment of lines and fixed turns. It had become a living record of signals, small actions, and shifting choices. The city itself had not changed, yet the way he moved within it had. Every lantern, every mark, every crossing now belonged to a larger rhythm. What happens when small actions accumulate into a pattern too strong to ignore? He found that the map was not just guiding his feet. It was shaping his weeks, his habits, even his conversations. The small trial lines he had drawn grew into pathways that others now followed. It was no longer about certainty. It was about momentum. Consistency, however small, began to echo louder than doubt. The cartographer discovered that thresholds are not single doors. They are corridors. Each small crossing leads to another, until the journey itself becomes transformation. The truth is that progress compounds. The meaning is that repeated choices redraw not only maps, but entire lives. He realized that the world beyond the threshold was not mysterious. It was ordinary life, reframed. The difference was that now he carried tools to record, adjust, and share. And in this reframing, the city revealed its hidden structure, one that had always been there, waiting for attention. One morning, the cartographer returned to the square where his journey had begun. The streets were the same. The houses leaned with the same angles. The lanterns still flickered in the wind. But he did not see them as before. The city had not shifted. His vision had. He walked the main avenue, the same path that had once left him lost. Now each corner whispered with memory. Each scratch, each signal, each torn page of the past formed part of his inner map. The world outside had not changed. Yet for him, the road was entirely new. Isn't it true that once the eyes change, the landscape follows? He smiled, not because the city was different, but because he was. And with his notebook open on the table, he left the question for others to answer. What is the threshold you will cross today? The truth is that the city remains, but the traveler transforms. The meaning is that every map once lived becomes an inner compass. So here the story closes, not with an ending, but with an invitation. If you have seen signals in your own life, repeating, whispering, waiting, share one word in the comments. One word for the threshold you are ready to cross. And if you wish to continue this journey of questions, reflections, and living maps, subscribe and stay with us. Because the road ahead is not finished. It is only beginning.